Thoreau the Futurist and the Emerging Human. A vision of humanity living in balance. By Connie Baxter Marlow. Colorado Rocky Mountain School, Carbondale, Colorado. With Andrew Cameron Bailey as Henry David Thoreau, Richard Lyon as Joseph Polis, Thoreau's Indian guide. Commentary by Connie Baxter Marlow. Readings from Thoreau's Indians, 1,000 Indian-related references in Thoreau's writings. Set, Thoreau and Polis sitting around the campfire after a long day's paddle on the Allegash River in the Maine wilderness. Year, 1857.
Thus a man shall lead his life away here on the edge of the wilderness, in a new world, far in the dark of a continent, and have a flute to play at evening here, while his strains echo to the stars amid the howling of wolves, shall live, as it were, in the primitive age of the world, a primitive man. Yet he shall spend a sunny day, and in this century be my contemporary, perchance shall read some scattered leaves of literature, and sometimes talk with me. Why read history then, if the ages and the generations are now? He lives 3,000 years deep into time, an age not yet described by poets. Can you well go further back in history than this? Aye, for there turns up but now a still more ancient and primitive man, whose history is not brought down even to the former. In a bark vessel sewn with the roots of the spruce, with hornbeam paddles he dips his way along. He is but dim and misty to me, obscured by the eons that lie between the bark canoe and the bateau. He builds no house of logs, but a wigwam of skins. He eats no hot bread and sweet cake, but musquash and moose meat and the fat of bears. He glides up the Millinocket and is lost to my sight, as a more distant and misty cloud is seen flitting by behind a nearer and is lost in space. So he goes about his destiny, the red face of man.
These ideas are ideas that can change your lives, really. This Thoreau person really led the way for humanity through civil disobedience, because he applied this stuff to society and his life to society. He went to jail for not paying his taxes in support of the, to rebel against the Mexican War. So this guy did it, and he inspired Martin Luther King and Gandhi. So we can all do it, and he hoped that we would, and saw that we would. And now with Occupy Wall Street and Occupy America, people are standing up in a nonviolent way to say, hey, life's more than this. What we've created, in our with these logical minds that have operated on these, basically coming from this little teeny box of the scientific paradigm that's so separate from the rest of creation, that now it's time to stand up and become the true human.
Connie Baxter Marlow has spent the last 2 decades in close association with visionary Native American elders throughout the United States and Mexico, the Hopi, Maya, Tarahumara, Huichol, Wabanaki, Lakota, Ute, and most recently the Bushmen of the Kalahari in South Africa. She feels that in the cosmology of the indigenous people are clues to many of the missing pieces of the prevailing paradigm, information about the true nature of the universe. It is her understanding that humanity is about to make an evolutionary leap in consciousness to an understanding of the loving, interconnected, abundant universe and will align itself to this reality and subsequently choose to bring peace on earth in our lifetime. Connie believes that when we come together with the indigenous peoples as equals, as family, and we each open our hearts and our minds to the other, the melding of our gifts will bring a new perspective that is invisible at this time. To her, this new perspective will allow humanity to see the path to true unity, peace, and freedom. Connie finds Henry David Thoreau an important bridge to this shift in consciousness, and has produced a film series, The American Evolution, Voices of America, which weaves a tapestry of paradigm-shifting ideas with a visionary Thoreau scholar, a Penobscot Indian elder, a Muslim imam, and other important thinkers addressing these ideas. Connie is a Baxter of Maine. Her family bought and gave Mount Katahdin and 200,000 acres to the people of Maine to be held forever wild as a public park. It was on Katahdin that Thoreau experienced a life-changing epiphany. Andrew Cameron Bailey will represent Thoreau himself today, reading from Thoreau's Indians, the 1,000 Indian-related references in Thoreau's writings compiled by Bradley P. Dean, Ph.D. Richard Lyon, local actor, represents Joe Polis, Thoreau's Indian guide, also reading from Thoreau's Indians. According to Ralph Waldo Emerson and others, Joe Polis was one of three in Thoreau's pantheon of heroes, along with John Brown.
We are here today to touch on a couple of little-known aspects of the life and works of Henry David Thoreau, American author and visionary, his lifelong fascination with the American Indian, and his life-changing epiphany on Mount Katahdin in Maine. I believe these aspects, once understood, will be significant for humanity's evolution of consciousness. You have all seen clips from the American Evolution Voices of America series. I hope you all did your homework. Which cover many more details on these subjects, with the late Brad Dean, visionary Thoreau scholar, Richard Smith, Thoreau interpreter, and Arnie Neptune, Penobscot elder, discussing these matters. The simplest way to cut to the chase of what I'm driving at today is to say that we will be addressing the mystical nature of the universe. Quote, "The universe is wider than our views of it," wrote Thoreau, end quote, wrote Thoreau in the last chapter of Walden. This wider reality is the one we'll be looking at. Why? Because I believe that humanity is about to take an evolutionary leap into seeing and experiencing this reality, just as the transcendentalists, Thoreau and Emerson, did, and the mystics, visionaries, and indigenous peoples of the world do. Thoreau described himself as, quote, "a mystic, a transcendentalist, and a natural philosopher to boot." He's widely recognized as a natural philosopher and a transcendentalist. It is his vision as a mystic that has heretofore gone unacknowledged. Let's define a few terms. Mystical, of or stemming from direct communion with ultimate reality or God, of or having spiritual reality or import not apparent to the intelligence or senses. Transcendentalist, a literary and philosophical movement asserting the existence of an ideal spiritual reality transcending the empirical and knowable through intuition. As Brad Dean indicated in the film, Thoreau's lifelong fascination with the Indian led him to become one of the top ethnologists of his time. The study of the manners and customs of the Indians of the Algonquin group previous to contact with the civilized man was his primary scientific focus. Today, we're going to take Thoreau the next step by looking at him, his life, and his work from a different perspective, from a future Thoreau envisioned looking back. In his writing, Thoreau alludes to the future, to the possible human, and to the importance of the message carried by the arrowhead from the indigenous mind. We're going to show you a Thoreau and the Indian he experienced, give you some ideas to ponder, and suggest a synthesis from which we can all open to a larger reality and take the human potential up a notch to the place Thoreau dedicated his life to modeling. Many of the quotes you'll be hearing here are in the full-length part 2 of the American Evolution series.
So just so you understand, I am Henry David Thoreau. You may have heard of me. You were probably told to read my book, Walden. This is my friend, my Penobscot Native American friend, Joseph Polis. And we're in the midst of a long journey up the Allegash River system in Maine. We're sitting by the banks of the stream. We've got our paddle. Joe has his bow. Hopefully he's going to get something for us for dinner. I'm not sure about that. And everything you hear, except what comes from Connie, are my writings, the writings of Henry David Thoreau, and his friend Joe is going to actually be reading some of Henry's writings. So hopefully this will be clear enough. As much as sportsmen go in pursuit of ducks, and gunners of musquash, and scholars of rare books, and travelers of adventures, and poets of ideas, and all men of money, I go in search of arrowheads when the proper season comes around. The larger pestles and axes may perchance grow scarce and be broken, but the arrowhead shall perhaps never cease to wing its way through the ages to eternity. It was originally winged but for a short flight, but still, to my mind's eye, wings its way through the ages, bearing a message from the hand that shot it. They are not fossil bones, but as it were, fossil thoughts, forever reminding me of the mind that shaped them. I would fain know that I am treading in the tracks of human game, that I am on the trail of mind, and these little reminders never fail to set me right. There is scarcely a square rod of sand exposed in this neighborhood, but you may find on it the stone arrowheads of an extinct race. Far back as that time seems, when men went armed with bows and pointed stones here, yet so numerous are the signs of it. The finer particles of sand are blown away, and the arrow point remains. The race is as clean gone from here as this sand is swept clean by the wind. Such are our antiquities. These were our predecessors. Why then make such great ado about the Roman and the Greek and neglect the Indian? We need not wander off with boys in our imaginations to Juan Fernandez, to wonder at footprints in the sand there. Here is a print still more significant at our doors, the print of a race that has preceded us, and this the little symbol that nature has transmitted to us. Yes, this arrow-headed character is probably more ancient than any other, and to my mind, it has not been deciphered. Men should not go to New Zealand to write or think of Greece and Rome, no more to New England. New earths, new themes expect us. Celebrate not the Garden of Eden, but your own.
Thoreau made 3 excursions to the Maine woods, where he hired Indian guides to study their ways.
I narrowly watched his motions and listened attentively to his observations, for we had employed an Indian mainly that I might have the opportunity to study his ways.
On his first excursions to Mount Katahdin in September of 1846, the Indian guide he hired, Louis Neptune, failed to appear. Thoreau and his companions ended up climbing Katahdin without a guide. And on this climb, Thoreau experienced his life-changing epiphany, which is eloquently expressed in the controversial contact passage found in his essay Katahdin in the Maine Woods. And if you saw the film clips, you will have seen that contact passage and the significance of it. On Thoreau's second excursion to Maine, he hired Joe Attian, son of the governor, as his guide on a moose hunting expedition in 1853. And in 1857, on his last trip to Maine, he hired Joe Polis as his guide. Thoreau died 5 years later in 1862 after taking a trip to Minnesota, where he also explored the Indian culture. The relationship that developed between Thoreau and Polis during his last Maine excursion was to solidify in Thoreau's mind the importance of the Indian experience. Thoreau had been fascinated by the Indian from childhood. Thoreau saw that the Indian could see what he could see. Thoreau, as a mystic and a transcendentalist, resonated to an expanded reality. He possessed the ability to see and sense the spirit that is at the essence of all life. And from this vantage point, he could envision a society made up of the true human, acting from a connectedness that is foreign to most people at this time. Why was Joe Polis one of 3 of Thoreau's heroes? Because, as Brad Dean points out, Joe exemplified Thoreau's dream of the synthesis of the mystical indigenous connection to nature, to what I call the conscious loving universe, with the worldly man who could function in the modern times, exhibiting capabilities which I see as the emerging human, whose choices will take humanity closer to realizing our full potential as loving beings walking in balance. To me, this is the evolutionary leap of humanity. Thoreau saw and bemoaned the limitations of the modern society, and he resonated to the expanded reality of the mystic, and often experienced the natural world the way the Indian did. He dreamed of a future that would bridge these realities, and Joe Polis symbolized this possibility. In the Voices of America series, Part 1, Brad Dean notes that Thoreau saw a future in which humanity connects with its highest conscience, and writes of this in Civil Disobedience. Quote, "That government is best which governs least." Carried out, it finally amounts to this: that government is best which governs not at all. End quote. Brad states, if you don't mind me putting a parenthesis to Henry David Thoreau, what you need to say is, quote, "That government is best which governs not at all," because in such a government, all the citizens govern themselves. Thoreau sees the possibility of a society of humans living in balance. Brad goes on to say, quote, "What Thoreau wants is self-governors. Everyone is their own king and governor and Congress and Senate, and you do not need laws to oppress you because you have a law inwardly that manifests itself in your conduct outwardly." I will venture to say that there is a direct link between humanity's expanded mystical connection to the universe and its access to its highest conscience, its divine nature. That the message carried to the future by the arrowhead is the possibility of life lived in alignment with the oneness of creation and the sacredness of all things, concepts that lie at the foundation of indigenous cosmology. In a little book called Mystics as a Force for Change, an Indian named Ghost states, "Mysticism proposes a revolution from above and by consciousness. To say technology is the grammar of the future is dangerous nonsense. Technique and transcendence must learn to work together. That would be the beginning of the total man and totality thinking. And the individuals who will most help humanity in the hour of crisis are those who recognize a willed change from within as a step to total change in our relationship with reality, the harmony of the whole. The issue is plain. What is the true nature of things, and how do we embody it in our social living?" Albert Einstein stated that no problem was ever solved in the same consciousness in which it was created. We have built a house of cards on a false foundation of false assumptions that our logical minds have, given the information we have, responded to logically, and have gotten us to where we are right now. Once we have come to grasp the correct, accurate information about the nature of the universe, Our logical minds will take us to peace on earth, will have us bringing peace on earth. Thoreau states, quote, "The Indian begins where we leave off and seems so much the divine, and anything that fairly excites our admiration expands us," end quote. That's from an August 18th, 1857 letter to Harrison Blake, written shortly after Thoreau's final excursion to the Maine woods. Now, Thoreau and Polis will speak for themselves. We will take you on a little adventure into the Maine woods as they sit around the campfire after a long day's paddle on the Allegash River in the Maine wilderness.
The first man we saw on Indian Island was an Indian named Joseph Polis, whom my relative had known from a boy and now addressed familiarly as Joe. He was dressing a deer skin in his yard. The skin was spread over a slanting log, and he was scraping it with a stick held by both hands. He was stoutly built, perhaps a little above the middle height, with a broad face and, as others said, perfect Indian features and complexion. His house was a 2-story white one with blinds, the best looking that I noticed there, and as good as an average one on a New England village street. It was surrounded by a garden and fruit trees, single corn stalks standing thinly among the beans. He was one of the aristocracy. It appeared that he had represented his tribe at Augusta, and also once at Washington, where he had met some Western chiefs. Also, he had called on Daniel Webster in Boston. We asked him if he knew any good Indian who would like to go into the woods with us, to which he answered, out of that strange remoteness in which the Indian ever dwells to the white man, "Me like to go myself. Me want to get some moose," and kept on scraping the skin. Early on the morning of July 23rd, the stage called for us, the Indian having breakfasted with us and already placed the baggage in the canoe to see how it would go. My companion and I each had a large knapsack, as full as it would hold, and we had 2 large India rubber bags which held our provision and utensils. As for the Indian, all the baggage he had besides his axe and gun was a blanket, which he brought loose in his hand. However, he had laid in a store of tobacco and a new pipe for the excursion. Our Indian said that he was a doctor and could tell me some medicinal use for every plant I could show him. I immediately tried him. He said that the inner bark of the aspen was good for sore eyes, and so on with various other plants, proving himself as good as his word. According to his account, he had acquired such knowledge in his youth from a wise old Indian with whom he associated, and he lamented that the present generation of Indians had lost a great deal.
Just before night, we saw a musquash. He did not say muskrat. The only one we saw on this voyage, swimming downward on the opposite side of the stream. The Indian, wishing to get one to eat, hushed us, saying, "Stop, me call him." And sitting flat on the bank, he began to make a curious squeaking, wiry sound with his lips, exerting himself considerably. I was greatly surprised, thought that I had at last got into the wilderness, and that he was a wild man indeed to be talking to a musquash. I did not know which of the two was the strangest to me. He seemed suddenly to have quite forsaken humanity and gone over to the musquash side. The musquash, however, as near as I could see, did not turn aside, though he may have hesitated a little, and the Indian said that he saw our fire. But it was evident that he was in the habit of calling the musquash to him, as he said. An acquaintance of mine, who was hunting moose in the woods a month after this, tells me that his Indian in this way repeatedly called the musquash within reach of his paddle in the moonlight and struck at them.
We carried round the falls just below on the west side. The rocks were on their edges and very sharp. The distance was about 3/4 of a mile. When we had carried over one load, the Indian returned by the shore, and I by the path. And though I made no particular haste, I was nevertheless surprised to see him at the other end as soon as I. It was remarkable how easily he got along over the worst ground. He said to me, I take canoe and you take the rest. Suppose you can keep along with me? I thought that he meant that while he ran down the rapids, I should keep along the shore and be ready to assist him from time to time, as I had done before. But as the walking would be very bad, I answered, I suppose you will go too fast for me, but I'll try. But I was to go by the path, he said. This, I thought, would not help the matter. I should have so far to go to get to the riverside when he wanted me. But neither was this what he wanted. He was proposing a race over the carry and asked me if I thought I could keep along with him by the same path, adding that I must be pretty smart to do it. As his load, the canoe, would be much the heaviest and bulkiest, though the simplest, I thought that I ought to be able to do it, and I said that I would try. So I proceeded to gather up the gun, axe, paddle, kettle, frying pan, plates, dippers, carpets, etc., etc., and while I was thus engaged, he threw me his cowhide boots. What? Are these in the bargain? I asked. Oh, yeah, he said. But before I could make a bundle of my load, I saw him disappearing over a hill with a canoe on his head. So, hastily scraping the various articles together, I started on the run and immediately went by him in the bushes. But I had no sooner left him out of sight in a rocky hollow than the greasy plates, dippers, etc., took to themselves wings, and while I was employed in gathering them up again, he went by me. But hastily pressing the sooty kettle to my side, I started once more, and soon passing him again, I saw him no more on the carry. I do not mention this as anything of a feat, for it was but poor running on my part, and he was obliged to move with great caution for fear of breaking his canoe as well as his neck. When he made his appearance, puffing and panting like myself, in answer to my inquiries where he had been, he said, "Locks cut 'em feet," and laughing, he added, "Ho, me love to play sometimes." He said that he and his companions, when they came to carry several miles long, used to try who would get over first, each perhaps with a canoe on his head. I bore the sign of the kettle on my brown linen sack for the rest of the voyage. He had previously complimented me on my paddling, saying that I paddled just like anybody, giving me an Indian name which meant great paddler. I observed that I should like to go to school to him to learn his language, living on the Indian island the while. Could not that be done? Oh, yeah, he replied. Good many do so. I asked how long he thought it would take. He said, 1 week. I told him that in this voyage I would tell him all that I knew, and he should tell me all that he knew, to which he readily agreed. I was surprised to hear him say that he liked to go to Boston, New York, Philadelphia, etc., and that he would like to live there. But then, as if relenting a little, when he thought what a poor figure he would make there, he added, I suppose I live in New York. I'd be the poorest hunter, I expect. He understood very well both his superiority and his inferiority to the whites.
I asked him how he guided himself in the woods. He replied, "Great difference between me and the white man. It appeared as if the sources of information were so various that he did not give a distinct conscious attention to any one, and so could not readily refer to any when questioned about it. But he found his way very much as an animal does. Perhaps what is commonly called instinct in the animal, in this case is merely a sharpened and educated sense. Often, when an Indian says, 'I don't know,' in regard to the route he is to take, he does not mean what a white man would by these words, for his Indian instinct may tell him still as much as the most confident white man knows. He does not carry things in his head, nor remember the route exactly like a white man, but relies on himself at the moment. Not having experienced the need of the other sort of knowledge, all labeled and arranged, he has not acquired it."
The next day, the Indian told me their name for the phosphorescent light I had seen in the night. And on my inquiring concerning the will-o'-the-wisp and the like phenomena, he said that his folks sometimes saw fires passing along at various heights, even as high as the trees, and making a noise. I was prepared after this to hear of the most startling and unimagined phenomena witnessed by his folks. They are abroad at all hours and seasons in scenes so unfrequented by white men. Nature must have made 1,000 revelations to them which are still secrets to us. It suggested, too, that the same experience always gives birth to the same sort of belief or religion. One revelation has been made to the Indian, another to the white man. I have much to learn of the Indian, nothing of the missionary. I'm not sure, but all that would tempt me to teach the Indian my religion would be his promise to teach me his. A scientific explanation, as it is called, would have been altogether out of place there. That is for pale daylight. Science with its retorts would have put me to sleep. It was the opportunity to be ignorant that I improved. It suggested to me that there was something to be seen if one had eyes. It made a believer of me more than before. I believed that the woods were not tenantless, but chock full of honest spirits as good as myself any day. Not an empty chamber in which chemistry was left to work alone, but an inhabited house. And for a few moments I enjoyed fellowship with them. On another occasion, I was lying there listening to the Indians. I amused myself with trying to guess at their subject by their gesture or some proper name introduced. There can be no more startling evidence of their being a distinct and comparatively aboriginal race than to hear this unaltered Indian language in which the white man cannot speak nor understand. We may suspect change and deterioration in almost every other particular, but the language, which is so wholly unintelligible to us, took me by surprise, though I'd found so many arrowheads, that it convinced me that the Indian was not the invention of historians and poets. These were the sounds that had issued from the wigwams of this country before Columbus was born. They have not yet died away. And, with remarkably few exceptions, the language of their forefathers is still copious enough for them. I felt that I stood, or rather laid, as near to the primitive man of America that night as any of its discoverers ever did. And as we drew near to Old Town, I asked Polis if he was not glad to get home again, but there was no relenting to his wildness. He said, "It makes no difference to me where I am." We stopped for an hour at Polis's house, where my companion shaved with his razor, which he pronounced in very good condition. Mrs. Polis wore a hat and had a silver brooch on her breast, but she was not introduced to us. The house was roomy and neat. This was the last I saw of Joe Polis. We took the last train and reached Bangor that night.
This experience with Polis was so significant to Thoreau that he would not immediately publish his account of the excursion for fear of offending Polis. On his deathbed, Thoreau's last words were Indian and moose. Thoreau and the Indian transcend the experience of everyday man. Thoreau saw salvation in this transcendence. It allowed him to see the human potential. He was not, however, a stranger to the shadow side of the Indian nor of the white man. He had an extraordinary insight into the human condition, its limitations, and its possibilities. His dream was to inspire his readers, the human race, to a higher place. The truth will set us free. And each race must acknowledge the dichotomy of its light and its shadow. Thoreau expresses this dichotomy in the following passage.
What an evidence it is, after all, of civilization, or of a capacity for improvement, that savages like our Indians, who in their protracted wars stealthily slay men, women, and children without mercy, what a wonderful evidence it is, I say, of their capacity for improvement, that even they can enter into the most formal compact or treaty of peace, burying the hatchet, etc., and treating with each other with as much consideration as the most enlightened states. You would say that they had a genius for diplomacy as well as for war. Consider that Iroquois torturing his captive, and now behold him in the council chamber, where he meets the representatives of the hostile nation to treat of peace, conducting with such perfect dignity and decorum, betraying such a sense of justness. These savages are equal to us civilized men in their treaties, and I fear not essentially worse in their wars.
Every race, every human has a light and a shadow side. We cannot burden anyone with the idea that he has no shadow. Each race has passed through dark hours in our evolution. Without rose-colored glasses, Thoreau could see beyond our limitations to the higher truths, because he shared a reality with the Indian from which he could see possibilities. Joe will now read Thoreau's writings that indicate this transcendence.
We talk of civilizing the Indian, but that is not the name for his improvement. If we could listen but for an instant to the chant of the Indian muse, we should understand why he will not exchange his savageness for civilization. By the wary independence and aloofness of his dim forest life, he preserves his intercourse with his native gods and is admitted from time to time to a rare and peculiar society with nature. He has glances of starry recognition to which our saloons are strangers. The steady illumination of his genius, dim only because distant, is like the faint but satisfying light of the stars compared with the dazzling but ineffectual and short-lived blaze of candles. We would not always be soothing and taming nature, breaking the horse and the ox, but sometimes ride the horse wild and chase the buffalo. The Indian's intercourse with nature is at least such as admits of the greatest independence of each. The white man comes, pale as the dawn, with a load of thought, with a slumbering intelligence as a fire raked up, knowing well what he knows, not guessing but calculating, strong in community, yielding obedience to authority, of experienced race, of wonderful, wonderful common sense, dull but capable, slow but persevering, severe but just, of little humor but genuine, a laboring man, despising game and sport, building a house that endures, a framed house. He buys the Indian's moccasins and baskets, then buys his hunting grounds, and at length forgets where he is buried and plows up his bones. And here town records, old, tattered, time-worn, weather-stained chronicles, contain the Indian sachem's mark perchance, an arrow or a beaver, and the few fatal words by which he deeded his hunting grounds away. The white man comes with a list of ancient Saxon, Norman, and Celtic names and strews them up and down his river: Framingham, Sudbury, Bedford, Carlisle, Billerica, Chelmsford. And this is New Angleland, and these are the New West Saxons, whom the red men call not Anglo-English or English, but Yangtze, and so at last they are known for Yankees. He looks far into the futurity, wandering as familiarly through the land of spirits as the civilized man through his woodlot or pleasure grounds. The Indian's life is practical poetry, a perfect epic. His earth is his hunting ground. He lives suns and winters. The sun is his timepiece. He journeys to its rising or its setting, to the abode of winter or the land whence the summer comes. He never listens to the thunder, but he's reminded of the Great Spirit. It is his voice. To him, the lightning is less terrible than it is sublime, the rainbow less beautiful than it is wonderful, the sun less warm than it is glorious. The savage dies and is buried. He sleeps with his forefathers, and before many winters his dust returns to dust again, and his body is mingled with the elements. The civilized man can scarce sleep even in his grave. Not even there are the weary at rest, nor do the wicked cease from troubling. The savage may be, and often is, a sage. Our Indian is more of a man than an inhabitant of a city. He lives as a man, he thinks as a man, he dies as a man. The latter, the white man, it is true, is more learned. Learning is art's creature, but it is not essential to the perfect man. It cannot educate.
The savage is far-sighted. His eye, like the poet's, doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven.
I thought I might tell you a tiny bit of information you might enjoy. How Walden Pond got its name. Thoreau tells us in Walden, quote, "My townsmen have all heard the tradition. The oldest people tell me that they heard it in their youth, that anciently the Indians were holding a powwow upon a hill here, which rose as high into the heavens as the pond now sinks deep into the earth. And they used much profanity, as the story goes, though this vice is one of which the Indians were never guilty. And while they were thus engaged, the hill shook and suddenly sank, and only one old squaw named Walden escaped, and from her the pond was named." Henry will continue with a few thoughts on the Indian.
The true man of science will have a rare Indian wisdom and will know nature better by his finer organization. He will smell, taste, see, hear, feel better than other men. His will be a deeper and finer experience. The charm of the Indian to me is that he stands free and unconstrained in nature, is her inhabitant, not her guest, and wears her easily and gracefully. But the civilized man has the habits of the house. His house is a prison in which he finds himself oppressed and confined, not sheltered and protected. He walks as if he sustained the roof. He carries his arms as if the walls would fall in and crush him, and his feet remember the cellar beneath. His muscles are never relaxed. It is rare that he overcomes the house and learns to sit at home in it, and roof and floor and walls support themselves as the sky and trees and earth. For the Indian, there is no safety but in the plow. If he would not be pushed into the Pacific, he must seize hold of a plow tail and let go of his bow and arrow, his fish spear and rifle. This is the only Christianity that will save him. His fate says sternly to him, "Forsake the hunter's life and enter into the agricultural, the second state of man. Root yourselves a little deeper in the soil if you would continue to be the occupants of the country." But I confess I have no little sympathy with the Indians and the hunter men. They seem to me a distinct and equally respectable people, born to wander and to hunt, and not to be inoculated with the twilight civilization of the white man. The Indian, perchance, has not made up his mind to some things which the white man has consented to. He has not, in all respects, stooped so low, and hence, though he too loves food and warmth, he draws his tattered blanket about him and follows his father's, rather than barter his birthright. He dies, and no doubt his genius judges him well. But he is not worsted in the fight. He is not destroyed. He only migrates beyond the Pacific to more spacious and happier hunting grounds. A race of hunters can never withstand the inroads of a race of husbandmen. The latter burrow in the night into their country and undermine them. And even if the hunter is brave enough to resist, his game is timid and has already fled. The rifle alone would never exterminate it, but the plow is a more fatal weapon. It wins the country inch by inch and holds all it gets. But this points to a distinction between the civilized man and the savage, and no doubt they have designs on us in making of the life of a civilized people an institution in which the life of the individual is to a great extent absorbed, in order perchance to preserve and perfect the race. But I wish to show at what a sacrifice this advantage is obtained, and to suggest that we may possibly so live as to secure all the advantage without suffering any of the disadvantage. I think of myself in a wilder country and a little nearer to primitive times when I read in old books which spell the word savages with an L, salvages, reminding me of the derivation of the word from silva. There is some of the wild wood and its bristling branches still left in their language. The savages they describe are really salvages, men of the woods. These remind us that not only for strength, but for beauty, the poet must from time to time travel the logger's path and the Indian's trail, to drink at some new and more bracing fountain of the muses far in the recesses of the wilderness. If then we would indeed restore mankind by truly Indian, botanic, magnetic, and natural means, let us first be as simple and well as nature ourselves, dispel the clouds which hang over our own brows, and take up a little life into our pores. Do not stay to be an overseer of the poor, but endeavor to become one of the worthies of the world.
Thoreau's political life, his life in society, his role as an author, exemplify the mystical connection to the universe. Thoreau was the possible human. His ability to see and experience an expanded reality drove his actions on a day-to-day basis. He acted according to his inner knowing, his conscience, and changed the world through modeling and communicating what he saw and resonated to. He dreamt of a nation of individuals operating in freedom that would actualize on Earth the highest human potential and power of the universe. Thoreau desperately wanted the world to see what he could see and believed that one day we would. It was only a matter of humanity's waking up to its true nature. On the title page of Walden, Thoreau wrote, quote, "I do not propose to write an ode to dejection, but to brag as lustily as Chanticleer in the morning, if only to wake my neighbors up," end quote. I, for one, believe that Thoreau, the futurist, saw, sensed the evolution of consciousness that humanity was to undergo, the merging of the inner and outer self, and he knew he was a front runner. It's time for the vision of Thoreau, for the cosmology of the American Indian, for the heart of humanity, and the true destiny of America to become actualized through our day-to-day choices as we bring peace on earth, heaven on earth. New earths, new themes expect us. Henry David Thoreau. Thank you. Thanks, gentlemen. We have a few minutes if you guys have any questions
Good job, sir.
of any of us on these ideas, on and how did it go for you? Oh, thanks. Were you able, was this something that you could take in, or was it boring? Did it work for you guys?
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Because these ideas are ideas that can change your lives, really. You know, this Thoreau person really led the way for humanity through civil disobedience, because he applied this stuff to society and his life to society. You know, he went to jail for not paying his taxes in support of the to rebel against the Mexican War. So this guy did it, and he inspired Martin Luther King and Gandhi. So we can all do it, and he hoped that we would, and saw that we would. And now with Occupy Wall Street and Occupy America, you know, people are standing up in a nonviolent way to say, hey, you know, life's more than this. What we've created, you know, in our with these logical minds that have operated on these, basically coming from this little teeny box of the scientific paradigm that's so separate from the rest of creation, that now it's time to stand up and become the true human. So do you guys have anything to say?
Well, let's see, any
I don't
feedback?
see any hands.
Come on, there's
Anybody desperate?
all kinds of excited people out there. Can't wait to see. Anything? Connie mentioned several times the phrase civil disobedience. Anybody know what those two words mean in reference to Thoreau? Right, exactly. There's actually a very short book that Thoreau wrote called Civil Disobedience. It's an extraordinary sort of declaration of independence for the individual. It's really powerful, and I would highly recommend that. So just whenever she mentioned in civil disobedience, he said she's referring to the book.
Yeah, and he believed in the power of the individual, and each of us coming from this higher conscience, which we made very clear in this. But that's the key, is to each of us go inside and listen to that little voice inside that's telling us what to do. And it may be totally contrary to the consensus reality that we've all been raised in. And there's something new coming on the planet. It's up to us to bring it to pass with our choices. It's not just coming, it's coming through the human heart and us resonating to it, listening to our inner promptings, honoring our hearts with courage and action. It's not just sitting and thinking, oh, I know something, I wish I could do this. It's saying, I'm doing this. And that way you set everyone around you free because you have modeled the courage to act according to your heart instead of what a fear-based paradigm has conditioned you to think is the proper way to act. Now, Thoreau has a great quote. Pardon?
Wouldn't that bring kind of an anarchy?
Well,
Do you think it would? Because if everybody just went around doing
right,
what
in
came
this,
to their head, I mean,
right. But see, in this conditioned frequency, with these assumptions that we have and how we've been conditioned, yes, because we're operating out of fear, out of greed, out of basically fear.
Yeah.
Okay? But when we get to this place that Thoreau's talking about, you see, that's the point we're trying to make with this thing, is that when you're in your higher conscience, that once we all get to that place, it's not going to be anarchy. It's going to be, and I asked an Indian elder, because I spent a lot of time with native elders, and I asked her that very question. And she said, no, because I said, is there going to be a leader of this transformation, you know? And she said, no. And I said, doesn't that mean anarchy? And she said, no, it means we're each going to take our piece of the hoop of life. We're going to fit it together with everyone else, and we're going to create the hoop of life.
Do you think we're too late as a society for that?
Heavens, no.
No?
No, we're
man,
just
this
starting
is
to wake
it.
up. We're just starting to wake up.
This is it.
May I comment
Yeah,
on that
please.
further?
And it looks like we have a question over there. So
But go ahead.
let's hear from Joe first.
Oh, well, Thoreau lifts up this synchronicity he sees between the Native American spirituality and transcendentalism. And there are other traditions, too, which have looked at the universe from what would be called an esoteric point of view, which is not based out of fear, but is based out of a vision of wholeness. So that rather than myself being a separate human being who's sort of seeking to attach myself to something greater, the assumption would be that we are already the divine wholeness. The divine wholeness, the completeness, which creates us, the energy that sustains us, which we're not in control of and we didn't make ourselves, right? That's already fully in us. So it's rather a question of waking up, right, to the realization that we are already that which we've thought we need to seek.
Right,
And if I am the vibration of the harmony out of which I'm created and which has ordered all things, then my own surrender to my higher nature is that I will always be in alignment, right, with the passage of higher vision. And many traditions have practices, affirmations or meditation systems or raising Kundalini yoga or doing ritual or shamanic journeys where one can achieve this consciousness and realize that the Hindu formula is we are that. Whatever it is that we think is the divine completeness, we're already it. And it's a question not of operating out of fear and separation to try and get it. It's a question of letting go of the illusions, which are fear and survival based, that keep us from realizing we're already it. Thoreau makes the point that the Native American people live in that consciousness, that I am already immanently one with all things and one with nature, and so I know the medicine of all the plants, and I can see things that the rational consciousness doesn't. Does that make sense to you?
Would it take a lifetime to get to that point? Because as an Indian, you grow up, I have no idea. I feel you grow up in the while learning about all the different plants as medicines and being one with the wild and stuff. And like as society today, we grew up with Xboxes and PlayStations.
Right.
So would it like, are we too late to like, because you need to spend a lifetime getting to that higher
Well,
knowledge?
Not at all.
I have an answer.
Yeah.
But
I would say, and this is a big subject, and we could
Quantum.
spend the next several hours discussing exactly that point.
Mm.
I believe we live in a time right now where, just for example,
it can happen.
Henry David Thoreau was a very unusual person. He actually studied the Indians. In those days, nobody thought they had anything to bring. We're now looking to all these other cultures, these indigenous cultures. We're learning a lot from them, and it's about, we white people have a lot to bring to it. We humans are evolving to a whole new phase, and I don't want to miss this young person.
Okay, but I want to say
Can
something.
we have, there's a
Can
question
I just
over
say
there.
something
Yeah.
to you and to all of you? You have it all inside of you now,
That's right.
okay? And there's a veil that's lifting. There's been a veil, a thick veil between you and your true self and the true nature of the universe. But that veil is thinning and lifting. All you have to do is give permission, okay? Ask, and you shall receive. Just give permission. Know it's possible. Hopefully we've opened your hearts and minds to possibilities, okay? No, it sits inside of you. It can be instantaneous. It doesn't take any training whatsoever. It's what's up on the planet right now. You guys got born when you did, you chose it, you're here, and it's just this far away. It's right, as close to you as your juggler, right? But let's,
I just,
Can-
we're kind of running.
I know.
I know it. I think there was one question I didn't want to lose in there. Is that okay?
Yeah, can I just, before we take that question,
Yeah.
once we're done, I'm just gonna ask for a few people to stay and help pack up here.
Is there another group coming in
There's
here?
not another group coming in, but we'll just help you to pack up. your
Okay.
That's
stuff.
okay.
And I'll
we'll
give
be
you
fine.
guys a late note. So let's have Jane's question and then kind of after it. Are you sure?
Did it get answered?
Well, not really. I have the view, like, at least for myself, when people let go, normally hate and greed comes out. It takes a constant struggle with that inside yourself to become a good human being. I don't feel like goodness exists inside people. If goodness was our nature, we would have been killed by wolves when we were evolving. All animals on Earth are built to survive and kill other life. I mean, like, if humans were a peaceful society, we just wouldn't have evolved at all. Humans, in our evolution, we survived by taking advantage of other animals, taking advantage of our surroundings, and we see that in our society today. That's what it's based around. Exploiting our surroundings and the people around us to put ourselves higher than them. I think that's what exists inside us, and we need to be grown up in a society that rejects that to truly evolve out of it. So, I think it's the other way around.
Well, we as a species are evolving.
Choices to
And
be
those fear-based assumptions that you just described very graphically are no longer relevant. We don't need them anymore. There are very few wolves right outside the door. There are scary neighbors or people on the other side of some border who share the same fearful assumptions that we share. It's time for that stuff to go away. That is no longer relevant to current society. And if we don't wake up, we're in big trouble.
But once we understand that we're all one, that fear of that neighbor goes away. Okay, we've been operating from a fear energy, okay, which is changing. The earth is going into a higher place, a higher energy, so that playing out that fear energy of separation, he's different from me, so I'm scared of him, or I'm going to hoard my stuff because there isn't enough stuff, and if that guy gets my stuff, then my kids aren't going to survive, or I'm not going to survive. Those are fear-based assumptions that it's a scarce universe, which isn't true. I mean, so this is a very deep subject, guys.
It's a huge, actually, this is what we write books about, and this is what Connie and I teach. We actually work on exactly that.
We have a workshop on Saturday called the Trust Frequency.
It's what we do. It's called the Trust
Do you guys
Frequency.
have an idea?
Yeah.
Well, we're leaving, but we're coming back. I raised
We're
my
back and
3
forth
kids
all the
here.
time.
My daughter actually went to CRMS, but yeah, we're in and out. But we're giving a workshop on Saturday. You ought to come if you can. all day Saturday down at Third
Just wait,
Street
just
Center.
wait, just wait.
But-
On behalf of the class, I want to thank you, Connie, Andrew, and Richard, and this is just a little thank you card with their classmate.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
So do we
Thank you.
have
Thanks
another
for
round
coming
of
and
applause?
listening. It'd be great fun to come back and have a discussion with you guys.
That'd be sweet.
Yeah, I'll be back at Christmas for 3 weeks. I don't know when your vacation is, but maybe we could sneak something.
As you can see, it opens up a lot of the deepest questions.
And it has to do with our assumptions about the nature of the universe, which is what I pointed out in this thing. That our logical minds have responded to a certain set of assumptions that are actually erroneous. They're actually 180 degrees off, exactly the opposite of what the true nature of the universe is. Okay? So we'll leave you with that. And you can go to our thetrustfrequency.net. It's a website where we examine these current assumptions and replace them with what we consider more accurate assumptions about the nature of the universe. It comes from quantum science and indigenous cosmology. So try that out, thetrustfrequency.net.